Welcome back for chapter 3. Okay. We're going to be talking about the characteristics of the effective counselor. So this is really talking about you, right? All right, so we're going to start with an activity. We'll do this in class, but I want you to be thinking about it on a sheet of paper, just kind of brain dump to these response to these questions. What type of counselor would you refer your best friend or your most treasured person that you love the most in the world? What would you want that counselor to be like? Whose hands would you want to place your trust in? Um, would you want that counselor to be studious, well-read, highly educated? Would you want them to be soft and sweet, or would you want them to be confident and stern with you? Or just think of all those things. How would you want that counselor to be for your best friend or your partner, your loved one, your whoever? Something else, have you ever been to counseling? If you're comfortable sharing that, what was your experience like? What did you find helpful or not helpful about that counselor? What did you like about them? What didn't you like about them? And then if you've never been to counseling, what type of counselor would you hope to work with if you were the client? So kind of going back up to those first set of questions, what would you want that counselor to be like? And then in class, we'll discuss with each other and we'll discuss as a group, kind of like we did. All right, so does counseling and psychotherapy work? Now, again, I'm including psychotherapy here as an interchangeable term with counseling just because that's how it is out in the real world. But know that your professional identity is counseling. You're a counselor. But does it work? So there was a silly little study that said no in the 50s by Eisnick, but there has been a ton of research since then to show that it actually does. Apparently, that study was flawed in the 50s. I don't know. But it shows that it does and that it is as effective as medication. And really, the best outcomes come from a combination of medication and counseling. But counseling is shown to be just as effective as medication alone. So that's pretty interesting. And what helps counseling work? Well, evidence-based practice. And you may have heard of this term before, especially if you have that psych background or an education background. But evidence-based just means research. Is there research to support the practice, the interventions, the approaches that you're doing with your clients? And so evidence-based practice suggests that counseling and psychotherapy is best when the counselor is familiar with the best research-based treatments. So you got to know kind of what is out there and what works best for which situations, right? CBT is one of the most widely researched approaches because it is easy to research. It's a lot of times it's manualized treatments, so it's very concrete, very easy to measure, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily better than everything. You can't just kind of blanket say, well, okay, well, if CBT is most widely researched, let's just use CBT for everything. So, for example, in my work with couples, the two most researched approaches are the Gottman method and emotionally focused therapy. And so I use emotionally focused therapy primarily, but a good counselor understands the client's unique situations and is able to choose the most effective treatments for it. So sometimes I sneak a little bit of Gottman in there. If they need a little bit more psychoed, Gottman is very top down. When I say top down, I mean in the brain, cognitive, and you learn what makes a good marriage and then you try to embody that. Emotionally focused therapy, is an evidence-based practice for couples therapy, and it's kind of bottom up, and we start with the emotions and then we make new meaning behind that, right? So sometimes my couples, we're heavily focused on EFT. Everybody in that practice is trained in EFT because it is an evidence-based practice. But sometimes I'll sneak a little Gottman in there based on my client's unique situation. If they're just not getting something, we'll go up top to the head and talk about more cognitive issues. So it also takes into account the client's preferences, values, and cultural background when choosing a treatment. So sometimes you might incorporate things that are pertinent specifically to that client's background. Say they want to incorporate prayer. And maybe you don't even practice like that, but if the client has a preference to incorporate their prayer, their scripture use, you go for that. That's a culturally competent client, and you're able to incorporate that into your work, into your evidence-based practices. So there are 9 characteristics of the effective counselor, and they're broken into these 2 categories. The first is the working alliance, and essentially that's just the relationship that you have as a human with another human sitting across from you. And the other category is your ability to deliver the theoretical approach. So this is your book smarts. Are you able to deliver that theoretical orientation that you are practicing? I still haven't got my voice back, so I'm taking a little tea break for a second. Hang on. Okay. All right. So as you can see here, the Working Alliance has a lot more underneath it. Research shows that the therapeutic relationship matters more than your ability to deliver a theory. But you need both. So you can't just have the relationship and no theoretical underpinnings. You have to be able to have both, but you really cannot take for granted the importance of these factors in the working alliance in the relationship with your client. So we're going to break it down and talk about each one of them. So empathy is the most obvious, duh, right? It's defined as understanding the inner world of the client. Are you able to build rapport? Are you able to elicit the information that you need from the client? Are you able to help the client feel accepted and valued in that room? And I look at the skills class as the way to enact, to really operationalize and communicate empathy by using basic skills. You're reflecting, you're using immediacy. You're going to learn about all this in your skills class. But this is really how you communicate empathy. It's active listening. And so empathy is so important. If the client doesn't feel seen, they're not going to feel safe, they're not going to open up, and you're not really going to be able to do that deep work. And then acceptance. So sometimes this is called positive regard, although I think it's possible to accept people and still not like it, right? Okay, I say I accept this about you, but I don't necessarily like it. But sometimes the book says sometimes this is called positive regard, acceptance. It suggests that regardless of what a client says, they will feel accepted. And you won't always like your client. Sometimes you won't even like your client, but you have to find one thing that you can understand, that you can accept, that you can really feel empathy for, and acceptance for. And so you've got to have positive regard. I would even go so far to say unconditional positive regard. No matter what craziness they kind of bring in to you, you're able to understand it. If you don't understand someone, this is in therapy and in life. If you don't understand someone, you don't have the whole story. And so being able to accept someone for who they are, because people find that so rarely out in the wild. So acceptance is another really important one. Genuineness, it's also called congruence. It's the counselor's ability to be open, authentic, and in touch with their feelings. So you don't necessarily have to have it all figured out, but you just have to know who you are, accept who you are, be comfortable in your own skin, and that's going to make your client so much more comfortable. And they really can pick up on that, and people really appreciate that genuineness. All right, so the next one is embracing a wellness perspective, and that's counseling, right? The wellness model. A counselor needs to attend to their own wellness and be assessed with the indivisible self model, and we'll talk about that when we talk about self-care. But yeah, embracing a wellness perspective, not what's wrong with you so much as what's right with you, what is right with you, and how can we build on what is good and well and right, and how do we move towards wellness? All right, so next is cultural competence. It's the ability of counselors to build alliances with clients who are different from them. You know, just because a client doesn't look like you or come from the same background as you, you've got to be able to find some kind of connection and common ground and ability to work with them. And so one model of that is the respectful model, and I've got a few slides down from here, and we'll go over that. Um, the it factor. So the it factor is just a specific individual trait possessed by a counselor that helps them connect with clients. So yours might be a sense of humor. Maybe you're just kind of really funny and you can lighten the mood and you can use that to your ability Some people's ability is just to be really grounded and really real with them. Some people can have that finesse to be able to be blunt with people and have it be well received by their clients. Not everybody can do that. So, start thinking about your it factor. I'm curious about what you think, what is your personal characteristic or trait that you think, um, you bring to the table just without any training? What's your it factor? All right, so here's the respectful model, and it just breaks things down. These are things that you can, when you really want to get to know your client on a deeper level and understand them without kind of looking at it through your own filtered lens of your own background. You want to consider the person's religious and spiritual identity, their economic and class background. And these are things you need to understand about your own self too, and how they intersect with another person's who's different from you. Also, sexual identity, of course, level of psychological development. Just because they are 21 doesn't mean they act 21. Just because they are 45 doesn't mean they act 45. A lot of times people get stunted in their psychological development if something traumatic happens. Usually when an addiction starts, they kind of get stunted there and they have to relearn some of those things in their healing. And then ethnic and racial identity, of course. Chronological developmental challenges. I think of this in terms of like the social clock. So if someone is feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm almost such and such an age and I don't have kids, or I'm not married, or I don't have a house, or I haven't hit this XYZ milestone, that's something that you need to consider because it may be causing distress to them, or it may be part of their strengths. And all of these, of course. And then T is for various forms of traumas and other threats to a sense of well-being. Very important to be trauma informed. Family background or history. So you might know people like this where they kind of look and seem like they just have a typical regular background, and you find out they got some crazy family history. There are certain things that research shows can really impact a person if you grow up in a household where your parent or a sibling is disabled, or struggles with addiction, has a severe mental illness. Those can impact family dynamics that can really shape a person in their formative years. And so it's important to know those things, that you might not necessarily get that information if you don't ask for it. And then unique physical characteristics, and how that might cause distress. And of course, you can think of, the disabilities or certain things that, disfigurements that maybe happen at certain phases of their development. So unique physical characteristics, location of residence, and language differences. So these are kind of two different things, but I guess they both start with an L. So here they are. Language differences. And we've got a student in here who is fluent in sign language. That's so cool. So that would be, something that to consider. All right, ability to deliver theoretical approach. So this is kind of that other category. So we've looked at factors that contribute to the relationship between you and the person. And now here are the factors that are important in your kind of book sense as a counselor, the training that you're getting. All right, so the first one is compatibility with a belief in a theory. So you don't pick a theory just because, oh, well, my professor likes this theory, so it's probably good, and I'm going to do that too. When you're in your theories class, you really need to be exploring what resonates with you, what makes the most sense with your worldview, because then you're really going to have a belief in it, and you're going to really be able to be grounded in that theory, that theoretical approach. So that might be cognitive behavioral therapy. School counselors, a lot of times you're going to use solution focused approaches because you don't have a lot of time in the schools and you're putting out fires. And so that's an easy one to really get behind, and be able to use in that setting. But anyway, I'm not going to go through all the theories because this isn't your theories class, but you really need to be thinking about which one of those theories resonates with you. Now, of course, you can integrate and be eclectic once you get more advanced, but you really need to pick one and kind of really get familiar with it and really practice it in the beginning. All right, next up is competence. The counselor's expertise and mastery is competence. So, some counselors, you should have a thirst for knowledge. So if you find yourself reading for class and you just aren't enjoying it, think about if this is for you, because you're gonna have to read even once you get the master's degree. You're gonna have to read and stay up on, evidence-based practices and what are the best therapeutic approaches. So you want to continually want to expand and improve your expertise. You're going to want to go and get trainings. And so I've done 3 weeks worth of trainings for EFT. I've gone on 3 separate trips and spent a week out of town and spent day long, every day we're in trainings. And, um, I had to pay to do that. I had to take off work to do that, but that was important to me because I want to be good at my craft. And so competence is important, and competence, you're going to get introduced to so much stuff in your master's program. This is just you're getting introduced to everything. You have to decide what is your niche, what is your area of expertise going to be, and then you have to chase that down for the rest of your career and get as much knowledge and training as you can. So if you don't like to read in grad school, you're probably going to fall behind in your practice. So just be thinking about that. And then lastly, cognitive complexity is the counselor's ability to reflect on what they are thinking and doing and determine if that is working in a given situation with your client. So you just have to be reflective. And then empathetic, however you want to say that, open-minded, self-aware. Open-minded is so important, y'all. You've got to be open-minded because not everyone's going to be like you or think like you. You've got to be open to whatever your client walks through the door with. You've got to be self-aware. What are your own kind of little triggers and glitches, right? What really sets you off or maybe takes you aback? You've got to be aware of that, and flexible counselors are cognitively complex. It is so important for you to be able to embrace ambiguity, and you'll learn that in this program. Not there, there's it's you're gonna get it depends is going to be the answer you're going to get so infuriated by probably sometimes, but you're going to hear that a lot because it does depend. It depends on the client, it depends on the context, it depends on their culture, it depends on a lot of things. So you've got to there's no black and white, right or wrong answer. You can go and ask all of your faculty members a question and you might get a different answer from everyone and they'll all be right. So you've got to be able to be comfortable in cognitive complexity. You've got to be comfortable with that. So that's important to know. Embrace the process, trust the process. And then you've got to take care of yourself. So I included this because this is all about you, right? As a counselor, what makes a good counselor? And it's an ethical issue. So an impairment of mental health professionals and school counselors on here. This is counselors have a responsibility to be aware of pressures and stresses that affect their lives and how they might affect their relationships with clients. So you've got to know, well, you don't have to have a perfect life. You don't have to have it all figured out, but you've got to be able to understand and cope with it and deal with it. And then counselors who are not attending to your own needs are unlikely to be effective. So that's why there's an ethical mandate to take care of yourself. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and you've got to make sure that you are tending to your own health and well-being. So we'll talk about some self-care. And I'm curious to know what you already do for self-care. So just a little advice here. So consider engaging in your own personal therapy. I've already said I think everyone should be in therapy. It's not just for emergencies and putting out your own fires, a thing. It's good for personal growth. Um, so therapy and other growth experiences, whatever works for you, prayer, meditation, reading, relaxation, exercises, podcasts, YouTube videos, mindfulness exercises, all that stuff is so good for you. Consider engaging in opportunities to develop increased flexibility and relativist thinking in your ways of understanding the world. Um, the counselors I find that have the most difficulty in practice are the ones who are so rigid. So if you can't really be flexible and go with the flow, because clients are going to bring all kind of stuff, and you're going to get all kind of walks of life and exposure to lots and lots of different stories and experiences, and you got to be able to roll with that and accept that and be open. So you got to be able to be flexible. Um, and it's going to result in a stronger sense of self, your ability to listen to feedback from others. That's important. Sometimes it's hard to hear critical feedback, like in supervision, but that's how you grow and that's how you learn. And it's all, meant for the betterment of you and for the betterment of your client, and becoming more genuine, empathic, and accepting of others. So that's what I really hope for y'all because that's what makes good counselors. And so when we encourage you to do that, it's coming from a place of, well, evidence. There's research to show that this is what makes for good counseling. So your to-dos and reminders, be sure to read chapters 3. This lecture covered chapter 3, and then you've also got chapter 4. That's what the quiz is going to cover, chapters 3 and 4, and then write a reflection on chapters 3 and 4. And be doing that LPC interview, trying to get on somebody's calendar and meet with someone and do an interview with them. They are due September 30th, I believe. I think that's all I have for that.